While the United States president was waiting for an opportunity to declare war, and while Rommel was fighting in the Sahara, the leader of Europe, Adolf Hitler, invaded the Soviet Union in June 1941. The General Secretary in Moscow didn't know what to do as the German panzer rolled forward. For context, the Soviets closed the Winter War in March 1940 when snow was lessening, skis were becoming useless, and Soviet transport was quickening. The Union then adopted the hit-and-run tactics that the Finns employed, along with white uniforms and other things. The Finns would come back once the Nazis invaded, but the Soviets annexed the Baltic states and North Romania in 1940. But first, one important thing to note. Russia is easier to invade than you think. Once you have the resources of Europe, one could easily march on Moscow as long as they come between the spring and autumn wet seasons and have vehicles capable of taking on the wet and the snow. You also need clothes. Aside from the failings of Napoleon, when Hitler invaded, nobody knew why he did it. He had already made a detailed peace with Zhurashvili, but he himself said, "What one does not have but needs, one must conquer." And he also wanted to destroy the Slavs. Historians say he needed Lebensraum, living space. Germany needed more land to make its own food. Anyway, 3 million troops entered Russia along an 1,800-mile front, but they would be dead to rights. If summer ended, winter began and fuel would freeze in their tanks. By November, they captured nearly 2 million soldiers, ensnared an unimaginable number of supplies, put Leningrad in a 4-year siege, occupied all of the Ukraine, and reached Moscow. But by then, things had gone wrong. The Red Army now outnumbered the Nazis. The Katyusha was being mass-produced more now. The purges of 38 were healing, and reforms from the Finns were implemented. The Rus also picked and moved their factories to the Urals and Asia, and they'd be busy. October to December, the Nazis went deep in Moscow. But near 190,000 women met them. The Reds forced the war to lull until the winter ended, at which point the German command ditched Moscow and focused on the other goal, the Caucasus, or more specifically, Baku. The oil there would decide the war, so much so the Soviets were prepared to blow them up, but they did that all over the place, including Sevastopol. But what about Africa? Again, when France surrendered, Equatorial Africa denied the Tripartite Pact and swore loyalty to the Free French and helped the Allies take Gabon. In October, plans concluded and they invaded from the north. They went over 150 miles south to Lambaréné, while a Cameroon fleet went across the coast crushing Vichy opposition. Governor Masson yielded in November and committed suicide. Although Italy had taken over the Horn, Anglo-African troops penetrated from Sudan, Kenya, and Yemen. The Brits started outnumbered, but Colonel Wingate organized Ethiopian rebels to annoy Mussolini. Major Platt came east, Lieutenant Cunningham came north, and Captain Hickling came south. Now here's a map. While the Allies couldn't end Vichy Africa until November 42, Hitler would continue his efforts against those socialists. Zhurashvili in the UK had taken Iran. For oil? Sure, but also to ensure connections with the other powers. Either way, spring saw Nazi consolidation here, and in June the Panthers turned toward Baku, and in the way, Stalingrad. It was going so well that Hitler chose to turn the Fourth Army south and leave Stalingrad to the Sixth Army, but they would return. The battle began in August. So far 6 million have died on this front. 2 million will die here. Stalingrad would be a 5-month battle with house-to-house combat, Nazi bombing, and snipers going Comrade Gilead German. Then it happened. A counterattack encircled the army and they denied surrender for a long time until February. Throughout the campaign, the Nazis' detailed organization was pit against Soviet mass production, and in wars of attrition, brawn, not brains, win, especially if you kill anyone who has a hint of defiance. With such a grave loss, der Fuhrer yielded Eastern authority to General von Manstein, who retreated and forced the Reds to overstretch their men. By this time, over 5 million Russians were sent to Germany to work to death, and fear of being kidnapped incited men to enlist for the army. Soviet General Zhukov fortified the city of Kursk, but the Nazis had made 3 new tanks and now dedicated 2/3 of their army here. Kursk was a slow month-long advance in July, and after the Allies had Sicily, the Nazis took a defensive strategy for the rest of this campaign. In November, the Reds took the eastern Ukraine along with Kiev, and started grand offensives next year. Throughout this campaign, great minds like Zhukov and von Manstein squared off. One organizing defense at Leningrad and a counter at Stalingrad, the other an offensive mastermind, until 1944. And 2 Soviet figures, Lydia Litviak and Richard Sorge, shot down 12 Nazi aircraft and retrieved information on continued peace from Japan respectively. And did I mention that there were horses this whole time? Such was the Eastern Front of World War II.